sometimes you don't always get what you want. And yes, this goes for toys. So today we're listing off all the toys that I wish, that you wish, they made back in the early days when Star Wars made awesome action figures. Will my list be the same as yours? Let's find out. Welcome back to the channel. And if you like vintage toys and their history, hit that subscribe button for more videos like this. In today's video, we aren't just going over the major figures that Kenner didn't make in the original line of action figures from 1977 to 1985, but when these figures were eventually made later by Hasbro, and some interesting fan-made options that will fit perfectly into your vintage Kenner collections. This is going to be a top 10 list, but we're also going to throw in some honorable mentions, starting at number 10. Okay, we got Luke as an X-Wing fighter. We got a B-Wing pilot. An A-Wing pilot. You see where I'm going with this? They never made a Y-Wing pilot for us, which meant we had to use other pilots or figures to take the controls on the Kenner Y-Wing. They did eventually give us a Y-Wing pilot in 2000 for Hasbro's Power of the Force relaunch, and several after that, but they always made them look like X-Wing fighters, except for 2011's release for the Shadow of the Darkside toys. And this is as close as they got to the suit and helmet, as you can see here in the movie reference. So for action figures that look like they could have been made back in the original Kenner run, we're going to have to go with fan-made customs. I found a pretty good fan-made option from 2013 by Iron Cow, but I wish we could have gotten this in the original Power of the Force line made in 1985. Moving on to number 9, Garinden, voiced in the original movie by an uncredited John Wayne. And honestly, it looks like a character that was designed for a college student film, who had to throw together a costume basically on no budget. But that's what makes this character cool. It was just an odd thing to see on screen, and one that every kid would do the voice for. And it would have been cool to have this back in 1978 as a playable action figure. Because after all, it did have a very pivotal part in the Tatooine scenes. And we eventually got this figure in 1997 for Hasbro's The Power of the Force line, and this one being one of their better looking figures. And then another one in 2006 for the Saga collection. But again, it would have been nice to see what Kenner's original design would have looked like. And there's a nice version of this action figure made by Stan Solo that will fit into your vintage line, and I saw it selling on Etsy. Coming in at number 8, Dr. Evazan. He had a speaking part, hung out with Walrus Man, who got killed by Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is definitely a character that's unique looking. Would he have been a peg warmer? Yeah, probably. But maybe he could have come bundled with the Cantina Adventure playset or the Creature Cantina, so you could use him on the Fight Attack feature. It would definitely be a collector's item today, much like the Blue Snaggletooth, especially if it were available only in playsets. We did eventually get one in 1997 from Hasbro in the Power of the Force 2 releases, followed by another release in 2004, 2012, 2021, and most recently, 2025, with what we could have gotten in 1978 with the modern retro action figure line. But it would have been great to get one from the original Kenner toy line. Number 7, Rebel Troop on the Tantive 4. Okay, I know you're all gonna check your action figure collection cabinets after I say this. In the original release of the first 21 action figures for the first Star Wars movie in 1977, there were no army building figures for the Rebels. The Empires had Stormtroopers, Death Squad commanders, and Death Star droids. All of these you can use to fill out your playsets. But for the Rebels, none. Zero. That's why making the Rebel Trooper from the first scene in the Tantive 4 would have been a great release, if anything, for army building. And we got our first one in 1997 for the Power of the Force 2 release. And then many more after that in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2011, 2018, 2022, 2024, and most recently in 2025, we would get the retro version, giving us the closest official version to what might have been had Kenner released it in 1978. Better late than never, I guess. Number 6. This one again is going to make you turn around and check your collections. There was only one official Empire droid released in the entire vintage Kenner line, and that was the Death Star droid. And even though we saw several droids in the scenes on the Death Star, we never got another one issued to us during that original toy run. But one that I wish they made back then was R2-Q5. First seen in The Return of the Jedi. With its orange and black shiny color scheme, it would have been a great contrast compared to R2 and R5. And it would have looked great next to your Imperial shuttles on your Death Star space station sets. But we would finally get one in 2001 from Hasbro in the Power of the Jedi line, and several others, including the most recent 2022 release for the Star Wars Toy Box line from shopdisney.com. But now, for you retro-style vintage collectors out there, there's a fan-made one released in about the year 2020 from Smith Lord Creations, now Stan Solo, but it's hard to find one of them, especially in the original card back. But it's a great figure that fits perfectly into your vintage Kenner line. Number 5, Mouse Droid. Every kid and adult would imitate this noise every time it was on screen. Why we never got this as an accessory to the Death Star space station or Darth Vader's Star Destroyer, or even packed with the Death Star droid as its accessory, is beyond me. And can you imagine how expensive that little accessory would be? Because you know that'd be the first thing that we would have lost as kids. We would eventually get one for the Saga series in 2002 as an accessory in the Death Star set. And most notably, the rare, the expensive, and hard to find 2011 Comic-Con exclusive Revenge of the Jedi Death Star set, which has become some sort of a collector grail. Coming in at number 4, Grand Moff Tarkin. With a character that plays such a pivotal role in the first movie, it's funny why we never got one. But in 1985, Kenner was very close to making a Grand Moff Tarkin action figure. At least there were notes and presentation briefs suggesting that they were going to make him in the second wave of the Power of the Force line. But since that line got shut down in 1986, and with no known action figure prototypes or coins being made of Tarkin, he would never get released. And we'd have to wait until 1997 in Hasbro's Power of the Force line, and finally getting a retro version of Tarkin in 2019 in the Escape the Death Star board game, which gives us the closest representation to how Tarkin could have looked had he been released in 1978. Number 3. It is, of course, Slave Leia, or Metal Bikini Leia, whichever you prefer. There have been rumors of why this was never made. Everything from George Lucas thought that this wouldn't be a wholesome toy for kids and parents would never buy this, all the way to sales for the Leia figures never sold well. Another rumor says that Lucasfilm didn't want to produce another Leia toy for the Return of the Jedi since there were so many Leia figures out there. Whatever the reason, we wish they had made one today from the original Kenner line. I think that one would have been a bestseller for sure. We would finally get one in 1997's Power of the Force line, and another figure most recently made in 2015 for the Toys R Us exclusive Jabba's Rancor Pit. But retro figure lovers can get one from Stan Solo, and that is the exact one that I have in my collection. Number 2, the Cantina Band. Although they had minimal screen time, they did play one of the catchiest tunes in the galaxy. They had a character design that I think would have flown off the shelves if they released it as a 4-pack. They did it in 1983 for the Max Rebo Band. When Return of the Jedi came out, we would eventually get our first Cantina member in 1997, Figurine Dion, for Hasbro's Power of the Force 2 line. And we'd get the entire band in the Modal Nodes pack in 2023. And if you want one in the retro Kenner style, I found a 5-pack on Etsy from Funky McClunky. It comes with their instruments, but it's unpainted. And before we get to number 1, here's a couple bonus figures. I wish Kenner would have made the Tonica sisters in a 2-pack. A side note here, because we recently got these figures carded in the Mos Eisley Cantina Deluxe set from Hasbro. I mean, even though they only had a couple seconds of screen time, they were pretty much the only females we saw besides Princess Leia. They were an enigma, and even as a kid, I always wondered who they were. That was before I read a ton of expanded universe stories that are now considered legend and not canon, but these two sisters have to get a cool mention for action figures that we wish we had back in the day. And Stan Solo sells these in the retro style for all you vintage Kenner lovers, like me. And these figures are some of my favorite fan-made figures out there. The last bonus figure on this list, Porkins. Kenner could have used the Rancor Keeper or the Gamorrean Guard that they eventually used to make Friar Tuck as a base mold for this one. And why not make Biggs or even Wedge, who had a bigger part in the movie? Don't get me wrong, those would have been cool. But really, you could just buy another X-Wing Luke and just use that as Wedge with a little bit of imagination. But Porkins was a standout, just as a movie character and his appearance in the movie. I know he wouldn't have flown off the shelves back then, so this, in the end, is a nice to have. We would eventually get a Porkins in the year 2000, but I haven't found a good fan-made retro-style version of Porkins. And if you know of one, let us all know down there in the comments. And now for my number one, Oola. Not only does she play a pivotal role in the Jabba Palace scenes, her death was one of the most heinous in all of the Star Wars characters. And just like Bib Fortuna and Amana Man, Oola would have been one of the most uniquely designed characters in the entire line. We would eventually get our first Oola in 1998 for the Power of the Force 2 line. That was a Star Wars fan club exclusive in a 2-pack with Salacious Crumb, but for a retro-looking version, you'll have to hunt in the fan-made release section. And again, Stan Solo makes a great version of Oola. So those are the figures that I wish Kenner made back in the day for the original Star Wars trilogy. And I know a lot of those figures are being made now, but it would have been nice to get all of them back in the day. And what figures would you include or exclude from my list? Let all of us know down there in the comments. And for more vintage toys and their history, click the videos on your screen now. And as always, my friends, thank you, and I'll see you next time.